Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining our session today on trusting zero trust. So this is a session where we talk about how we as VMware IT kind of reimagined the whole concept of security and resiliency, specifically with zero trust in mind. So who is this chap, Craig Savage? Well, it's me. Who am I? I'm someone who's been in security a very long time, hence the beard. I work a lot with the Cloud Security Alliance. I, as you probably guessed, focus a lot on information security outreach and communications. So I spend a fair amount of my time talking with our customers, helping them to understand some of the hurdles we overcame at VMware and how they could emulate that success in their environment. So let's talk about VMware. Hopefully, all of you would have seen this slide in some shape or form. This is the VMware Vision as part of our digital foundation. And what I would highlight here is, this is kind of the way VMware operates as well as VMware IT. We have private clouds, we have hybrid clouds, we have public clouds. We have traditional apps. It might come as a surprise to some, but we're a 20-plus-year-old company, and some of our applications are still monolithic on-prem. We have many cloud-native apps, and we have SaaS services as well. As for any device, I think I can safely say we've pretty much got every single one of those, with the possible exception of jet aircraft. I haven't come across us owning any jets as yet. And what's important to take away from this is, as the information security function at VMware, we're responsible for securing all of this. So it's a great marketing slide, but it also gives you a bit of a feel for the kind of workload that we have as a function within VMware. On that note, a lot of people don't realize just how big VMware is as an IT function. A lot of you interact with our sales and account executives. If you're lucky, you've had some interactions with our professional services organization. But we're a company that prides ourselves on our sort of startup behavior. So to a lot of people, VMware still seems like quite a small company. And I thought I'd just give you a quick run through. We're not going to go through all of these, don't worry. Of some of the key things to kind of give you a feel for actually, we're dealing with quite a lot of the same stuff that large enterprise customers deal with, because we're a large enterprise customer ourselves. So we have somewhere in the region of 7,500 ESXi hosts spread across our roughly 24 data centers around the world. That number kind of grows and shrinks depending on where we are with acquisitions and such like. When we want to talk about rate of change, we have about 2.2 million. It's probably trending more towards 2.5 million containers created and destroyed a week at the moment. Somewhere in the region of 1.6 million VMs created and destroyed. So you can imagine the churn that this causes in the environment, the challenge this puts on that traditional model of a configuration management database and traditional security monitoring and threat detection when you've got this many devices coming and going every week. Somewhere in the region of 46 petabytes of vSAN storage. For those of you that might have wondered if we use our own products, yes, we do. Pretty much every single one of them. We are treated, depending on who you talk to, as either customer 0 or customer 1. We're pretty much always the first adopter of any VMware product that comes out. 91,000, roughly, persistent VMs. So those aren't part of 1.6 million. Those hang around. Let's see what other interesting stats might be of interest to you guys. 45,000 Carbon Black Cloud installs, which, if you think we've got about 34,000 employees, that gives you an idea of how many additional devices employees have chosen to enroll in that platform. Even more so when you look at the top right there, devices managed by Workspace ONE, 64,000. That's pretty much every user has enrolled 2 devices, pretty much at VMware. Most of you will figure that out pretty quickly. That's probably their laptop and their smartphone. It's not necessarily always the case. We have a lot of employees in various regions around the world where they might not have a smartphone, or they might not have a laptop. So that speaks worlds there. That's probably enough for that slide. So let's talk a little bit about what is zero trust. So this is something we as a company have been working on internally as in VMware IT. Probably the best part of the last 6 years now. So for anyone who's telling you this is quick and easy, Maybe it is from their perspective. Certainly from ours, it's been a long journey, and that's the purpose of today. I'm going to share with you some of what we learned, what we call our 7 steps, so the 7 key areas we focused on to build this baseline. And some, welcome to take any questions that you guys might have on where we're going next, or help to get you guys started on this. So what's Zero Trust? Sometimes called Zero Trust networking, sometimes called Zero Trust architecture. But a lot of people, I think it's kind of the same as the ITIL library. The people think it's something you can implement. Zero Trust is a framework, an architectural model, an approach that you align to. You adopt the pieces that make sense. You modify the pieces to fit your environment. And some of the stuff just doesn't apply in all cases, right? So you do what makes most sense and is most useful to your organization, is what I'd say. Fundamentally, it changes the concept of what's trusted. Now, this has become very evident in the last year with everyone going to work from home, that a lot of corporates used to trust anything that was plugged into their network in their offices. And suddenly when people went to work from home, that caused a problem, because suddenly you didn't have the corporate network to plug into anymore. And so how did you figure out whether someone was doing the right thing? So that, it's kind of shifting that, perimeter model, and we'll talk more about that in a second. It's about gaining trust, building trust, right, on the network. So you don't inherently trust anything. What you do is you constantly checking with something. We call it kind of continuous authentication. How do we check that you're authorized and authenticated to be able to access the resource that you want? That's kind of where you're going with Zero Trust. Not so easy to achieve as it is to say, as with most things. So what are we looking at? For us, our view of Zero Trust is it's very user-centric, right? Rather than database-centric or data center-centric, which is what it used to be. Now the model still talks about data. We talk about data and users because it's our users accessing the data. So we're looking at layering security around the data, but with this specific intent of making sure it's usable and accessible from our users. Needs to be service-oriented. You can't create Zero Trust rules that break services. It's as tempting as it can be sometimes as a security professional. Stuff needs to work. The business needs to keep making money. And this ties in fundamentally to the intrinsic security vision from VMware. You look at the way our products are going, and I talk a lot more about this in other sessions. We're trying to get this concept of security as code to really exist in the real world and make an impact. And that's part of where we're going as a company. And we underpin that as an IT department within VMware. So let's talk a little bit. I mentioned the perimeter model. It's one of my favorite. You may have guessed from the accent. I come from England. We have a lot of castles. It was a great way of keeping yourself defended back in the Middle Ages, not so effective in the modern day, and much the same with IT security. The perimeter defense models kind of died. So what do we have to link this to the modern world, right? You've kind of got your outer checkpoint, your external firewall. Probably got your internal firewall, and between that is your demilitarizer, it's your DMZ. Main entrance, right? Internal firewall. So now you've traversed your normal path into your organization. Except now once you get inside, everything's trusted, right? So once you're on that corporate network, you can get to everything. This is the case in most organizations. And somewhere in there, in the castles, a treasure vault, in our world, we'd call it a data center. And that's what most cyber criminals are after. They want to get to that place. Except there's almost always some form of service tunnel, right? Well, an admin backdoor into environment. Castles had this. They always have a back gate. That's where the deliveries come in. That's where the food and stuff gets shipped in and shipped out. And we have the same in our IT environments. We have admin access to stuff, and that normally again is pretty much open, pretty much available, and generally protected by a password, which is pretty bad. So how does this compare to Zero Trust? I know this is year when not many of us have done much air travel, but cast your mind back to when you last did some air travel. Very similar to the airport experience, right? You turn up, you've got your ticket, you've got your passport, and you've got your luggage, right? So what is your ticket? Your ticket is basically your authorization. That says, you have booked onto such and such a flight going from, point A to point B, and who's booked that ticket. The passport is your authentication. That says you are who you say you are, and the name matches that on your ticket, right? So this is going to permit you to move forward in the airport. And then much like your device, your laptop, that's your luggage, right? That gets checked at that point as well. Where's your luggage? Does it meet the weight requirements? Has it got any stuff that it shouldn't have in? That kind of stuff, right? Same deal with your laptop. So you go to the security checkpoint. Like I said, they confirm all this kind of stuff. You've got your ticket, you've got the password. Your luggage is already gone. And that gets you into the boarding area, right? This is a lounge. So this is kind of a general access area, but you can't really do very much in the boarding lounge. You can sit in a chair and wait for your gate to open and boarding to start. But you can't get to any of the other places. Like if you wanted to get into a lounge, you're going to need a special kind of authorization. You're going to need a ticket that says you're flying business or first class. You're going to need a loyalty membership card to say, you get what I'm saying. You need a step up in authorization in order to access another area with privilege. You need a staff ID card if you want to get to any of the airside areas from the boarding lounge as well. So I'm hoping that you're starting to understand this is the shift to zero trust. You're allowed to be in the lounge. Not everybody's allowed to be in the lounge. We've checked that you're allowed to be in the lounge. And then if you want to do anything special from that point on, we check again. Right? Now you go to your gate guard and get an airplane. Again, they're checking again. Are you the person who should be getting on this airplane? Because, there used to be a thing in the airline industry that people get on the wrong flight, get up in the wrong city. Much the same with zero trust. If that's your finance application. We want to make sure that you're actually a finance user that has legitimate access to that finance application. And we'll talk more about this in a bit, but and at the correct time and from the usual location as well. It's kind of important. So let's step now to what's our vision for intrinsic security at VMware. So remember I said we keep applications and data there in the middle. We kind of talk about broadly 4 areas, but we split the bottom one in 2 just because it makes life a bit easier. How do we deal with access? How do we deal with the network? Cloud and workload kind of sit together. And then endpoint. And you'll notice those little arrows between, those are what we call the security pivot points. So those are the bits where you need to kind of have real insight and control, because that's when you can change something from being a malicious activity to just, someone that got defended against, basically. So let's talk about how we link our products, right? So that's carbon black, pretty much sits between workload and endpoint. That's our pivot point there. We use it extensively as the information security team. Up in the top right there, VMware, talking about the firewalls. That's what controls access to the network. No surprise, that's going to be our NSX products, last line, that kind of stuff. Pivot point between endpoint and access, Workspace ONE. Right? Hopefully you're all familiar with that product. Again, we use it extensively. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the last pivot point is between the network and the cloud, which is where our cloud health secure state products live, right? So that's what we use. Everything on this is stuff we use in VMware IT to do precisely this stuff. So you may have seen this as a marketing slide. I'm playing to you the vision of this is actually how we do it. And then let's talk a bit about those circles that we've seen appear there, right? So what's important is around all of this, we need visibility and analytics, and we need automation and orchestration. You cannot have the kind of telemetry, the kind of data that's coming in from this kind of environment without some form of automation and orchestration. We will literally just drowning people in data and useless. So as I said, those are the key players. You see the bits and pieces popping up on the picture there. We use all of this stuff in VMware. It's kind of inherent to our security posture. So let's talk a little bit about how we took all this kind of stuff and turned it into our ZeroTrust benchmark, if you like, our position in the world. So we call this our 7 steps model. Like I said, we focused on our users. We call them colleagues at VMware. So it's for a better colleague experience, right? If it's not making our users' lives easier, we're not really interested. If it's at least not impacting them, that's kind of okay, but we'd rather have it making their lives easier and better. So step 1 in our 7-step process was core network service, right? You know that old castle model? How do we start to compartmentalize? How do we start to break down that castle into sort of discrete pods where we've actually sort of taken a service-led approach, right? So Active Directory lives in its own little pod. LDAP lives in its own pod. Storage lives in its own pod. So we can control access between these various services to ensure that people can only access bits of the core network that they should be getting to. Second step in the process, right? Anything that can be managed must be managed. Now, this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but the reality is we're kind of lucky, I guess, for a better word, within VMware. We've got access to wonderful tools like Workspace ONE and Intelligent Hub, and we use this to manage endpoints. We use this to control a lot of our authentication and authorization from our endpoints. And so our view of the world is, why would we want an unmanaged device on our network? Well, we don't, because by default, that means we don't know what it is. We can't authorize it effectively. So our view is, if you've got the tools to make a device managed, you must manage it. Wi-Fi by default, Ethernet by exception. So again, this is kind of an enterprise model switch, right? It used to be the case that you go into the office or your campus and you sit down at your desk and you either plug your laptop into a docking station or you plug that Ethernet cable into the dongle if you've got a MacBook, which loves dongles now. And that gets you on the network. Right? The problem with that is it's an absolute nightmare to control from a security perspective without investing a huge amount of effort. So what we did is we said, well, actually, our wireless networks in all of our offices are perfectly up to scratch. We will make wireless the default access, and we will remove Ethernet. So it's a, if we use the Apple model, it's a green saving because we don't need to provide people with dongles, much the same as they can provide people with new iPhones with a power charger. But it's also a great saving in terms of effort and support, because now we don't need to manage Ethernet ports. And this is something that we've massively accelerated over this last year, as you might imagine, because everyone's been working from home. Everyone's been very used to working on their home Wi-Fi network. So when they return to the office, that's going to be pretty much the standard across the globe now for VMware offices. No more Ethernet jacks. Internet-only access. I'll talk a bit more about this in a further slide, but basically, get your users off your core network. They have no reason to be on your core network. And certainly this last year, again, has utterly proven this point. If people are able to work from home, they're able to work not on your core network, not directly connected to your core network. Yeah. Role-based network access control lists, apologies for all the acronyms, it is information security, and on-demand virtual private network, VPN, right? Again, talk about this in a little bit more, but this is as we start to step up to actually be going, okay, well, Bob works in finance and he's based in Palo Alto. So why is Bob suddenly accessing, the core compliance database from Singapore? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, so that's where we're starting to drill down into that. And then step 6. So this is possibly not entirely applicable to every organization, but there's use cases for everyone, right? Where you basically create segmented network pods, we call them blast chambers, for our developers to work in. So, if something goes wrong with their code or something's not going the way they wanted it to, it's completely contained. It can't get out into the wider network, which allows our developers a lot more freedom to work with stuff without that risk to the whole corporate. We do this as well for our support teams. If they need to support a legacy operating system or a legacy version of our product, we put that in an isolated segment so that any of the vulnerabilities that might exist in that version don't affect our corporate position. And then lastly, and this is normally the one that takes quite a bit of effort, is moving your admin level, your privileged activity to VDI access. And again, I'll talk about this. We go into all of these steps in a bit more detail on that. So let's talk about this core network service. Remember, I said this is about breaking that castle down into little points of core productivity, if you like, core services that you use to consume. So we have this policy at VMware where everything that goes into production pretty much for the last 4 years now has had to be microsegmented. So you literally cannot bring a new application into production in VMware unless it is fully microsegmented. And obviously there's been a program running to go and retrofit microsegmentation to the existing stuff. We're kind of getting at the point now where most of the stuff that existed 4 years ago is kind of either being refreshed or end of life. So we're at the point now where most of our network has microsegmentation. And certainly all of our core and key services are microsegmented because that was our focus. And you have to keep watch of this. It's that's something we've learned is, yes, it's policy that you have to have microsegmentation. Does that mean that people will do it? No, right? So you have to have a check to go, have you implemented the microsegmentation that was mandatory? And is it still working? Is it still doing what we expected? Because stuff changes over time, right? So this comes back to that whole legacy mindset of, you run a project, you implement a project, and then the project's done and you move on to the next thing. It's this continuous assessment of the environment, what's going on. NSX is key to this. No surprises there, hopefully, right? And the acquisitions that we've made in that space lately with stuff like Lastline has just amplified the usability and usefulness of this product to us. I'm not going to go through the slide in a huge amount of detail, but you can see there the kind of stuff that we're starting to do, where microsegmenting based on the activity that the service is providing, right? And then using the other tools like vRealize Network Insight to validate that the microsegmentation is working. There's a really useful function in Verni that not many people seem to know about, where you can literally confirm your microsegmentation rules. With its integration with NSX, you can take a look and go, this is the traffic that should be happening, and get Verni to confirm that the permitted traffic is flowing and non-permitted traffic is not flowing. Really useful thing to know about. So that's microsegmentation. Cloud connections. Now this picture is deliberately blurred for those of you that are wondering, because there's a lot of detail in there and I don't really want people hurting their eyes trying to read all the fine print. But effectively what we're talking about here is it's great to start controlling stuff that's on your network, but you also need to start controlling all the stuff you're doing in public clouds. And we do this with what we call our Cloud Connect service, which basically allows our developers a very simple UI to consume various cloud platforms, and we pretty much use all of the public clouds, as you'd imagine, in a safe and secure manner that automates the onboarding into our security monitoring and control platforms, right? Because that's one of the biggest issues most big enterprises have got, is it's really easy for most users to just put a company card, credit card details in on one of these public cloud platforms, and suddenly they've got compute power, and it's completely invisible to the security function. So we've put a lot of effort into making that a thing of the past, and make it really easy for our users to do the right thing. And obviously we get the economies of scale and stuff when they go through the right process, and it gives us that insight into what's going on our cloud platforms. And we use secure state extensively to both remediate problems that are going on. I think that's a key feature there. You tell it what the environment should look like, and it alerts you if it's not looking like that. Super useful for someone misconfiguring. The classic is someone takes an S3 bucket that should be private, inadvertently changes the permissions to public, and you'd think that's not a big thing, but it's happened to a number of the big players where someone's inadvertently changed a permission. That tells us straight away if that's happened and gives us a really easy and quick route to remediating that problem. And I think there's going to be some exciting stuff coming on that product in VMworld this year, so watch out for that. Endpoints. So you remember I was saying if it can be managed, it must be managed. This is what we're talking about. So, not everything can be managed. There are, we haven't as yet got a management agent for Raspberry Pi. Pity, I quite like them. And then the key thing there is if it's something that can't be managed or that the user doesn't want to be managed, because that's the other, it doesn't get access to core services. There's indirect access. So it can still have AD authentication, for example, Active Directory, but it can't access the Active Directory servers directly. There is no way for that user to get to the Active Directory servers other than pure authentication. We require multi-factor authentication across the board now, whether it's an internal service or an external service. That's super important. Passwords are awful. If you're interested, we can have a long conversation about, we work a lot with various research partners. We've been sponsoring studies for years now to look into, how to do better stuff with passwords, whether there's any hope that passwords could ever be secure. And pretty much the conclusive answer is no. As emphasized by Microsoft declaring that this year is the year they're going to get rid of passwords. So anything you can do to cut down on password use in your environment or stop a user from knowing the password, so leasing passwords to users, super important, really worth the effort. So let's just talk about user experience between a managed and an unmanaged device. Right, so the fully managed experience in our environment, they've got the full security stack. Right, so they've got Carbon Black, they've got Intelligent Hub. We're making sure patches are applied to their machine. We're making sure everything's running. The old days of users being able to turn off the antivirus because it interfered with something, you can't do that on our laptops anymore. Our applications are managed and pre-configured, so that cuts down on misconfiguration of applications causing risks. And we do a lot of stuff with certificates and push authentication. So I was talking to a colleague yesterday about the password thing, and he said, I don't think I've actually entered my VMware password for over a year. And it's like, well, no, you shouldn't have, because actually, if you're on a managed device, there's very, very, very small use cases left where we still require some form of password as a second or third factor, like a step-up authentication. Because actually we use certificates distributed by Intelligent Hub to the workspace that tells us, this is Craig's laptop. And then so all we need to do then, once we've got that kind of authorization on a risk-based profile, does that mean I need to put in my password to get to our intranet? No, because the certificate says it's a valid machine. And the biometrics on the machine ensure it's only me that's been able to unlock it, etc. So unmanaged, right? So like I said, there are use cases for this in the environment. They're fully network abstracted, right? So they can't access core network. They can't access anything sensitive. I like to describe this as a functional experience, right? You can get your job done, but it's not easy and it's not fun. But you can get stuff going, right? And a lot of it hinges on multi-factor authentication. So as soon as you want to access anything kind of important, now you need to start putting in your token code and that kind of stuff to kind of validate with that extra external factor that you are who you said you are. And this comes back to, remember, our vision statement, it's any device, any application, any cloud, securely. No matter whether you managed or unmanaged, it still needs to be secure. Obviously, the green side is significantly easier. So what are we managing on this endpoint? Right, so we're using Carbon Black to manage any inbound traffic. We're using products like data lifecycle protection, information rights management to manage stuff going out, because that's just as important. Exfiltration of data is a key concern for pretty much every corporate these days. And then on board. So, while the device is running, what are we doing to make sure everything is up to scratch? So, like I said, Intelligent Hub, that's doing patching, certificate-based authentication, and then multi-factor tokens to kind of make sure that the environment. So that kind of gives you a picture of like the whole bubble around our user. Using Carbon Black to make sure nothing untoward's coming into the environment, and making sure the Intelligent Hub platform, the Workspace ONE stuff, is making sure everything's doing what it should be doing on the laptop, and then we're making sure we're using IRM and DLP products to make sure nothing's leaving that shouldn't be. Remember, I talked about Wi-Fi by default. Promised you would talk about that in a bit more detail, and here it is. So, as I said, pretty much any office now by VMware, it's Wi-Fi by default. Why is this? Well, Wi-Fi delivers the kind of high speed and reliability that's needed. In general, although we do have some teams that do, we're not a video production company that needs really high bandwidth, low latency. And again, the whole work from home initiative over the last year, prompted by COVID, has kind of proven that we absolutely can work like this. There's no reason not to. As I said, getting rid of the Ethernet ports removes the dongle requirements, and genuinely the heartache that's involved in trying to effectively manage network access control across a global network is tough. And if you're doing that, I feel for you, because it's bad. And this is a great way to just get rid of that headache. Now, what I would say here is this feeds into the internet only access, right? What we don't mean is don't plug your Wi-Fi directly onto the internet. Right? What we mean is like an internet-like experience, right? So we still have firewalls. It's still a managed connection. We're still providing all the security controls to our users. It's just the Wi-Fi network doesn't directly connect to our corporate network anymore by any shape or form. Why do we do this? Well, it means we've got a consolidated user management. Because you think about most big corporates, and this is how we were, you've got one experience if you're in an office, and you've got a completely different experience if you're on the road. If you're in a hotel or a customer site or whatever, or home. And what we wanted to do is bring that into one experience. So how does the user, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, they've got the same security stack, they've got the same security posture, and they've got the same way of working. Because that just makes life easier for our users, makes life easier for our support people as well. Because now they don't need to go through the whole, are you attached to the network? Is your Ethernet cable connected? Is your Ethernet, adapter the primary network? Yada, yada, yada. Right. So that's what we're looking for here is, how do we create this managed internet connectivity, if you like, within our offices, where we do allow peer-to-peer connectivity, because, some of our users need that. So it's not quite the same as sitting in a Starbucks, but we want it to be very similar. So it gives our users that kind of consistent feel, and it gets their user endpoints off our network. Right? We just don't need them on our network anymore. So we're getting rid of it. Because we're looking at how do we get rid of this constant on VPN. Right? A lot of companies have this always connected VPN. It was great when it first came out. Now we're starting to see some of the downsides of having this permanently on VPN, especially with a lot of the attack vectors now focusing on end user endpoints. So we're looking at, how do we create this like on-demand kind of VPN connectivity? How do we make services that don't really need to sit behind the VPN, stop being behind the VPN anymore? So we're doing a lot of stuff in that space, again, because we've got managed endpoints that have got certificates on. A lot of the time, you don't need to have your VPN on, because actually that kind of device level or authentication can get you to those services that we use in a SaaS-like experience, a software as a service-like experience, with much better user experience, because you don't have the overhead of the VPN running in there. And I haven't had my VPN turned on for months now. Pretty much everything I need to get to works, with the exception of our, core internal security tools, which I tend to use VDI access for, and we'll talk about that in a second. The only use case I would call out here for a full VPN tunnel is if you've got people in high-risk countries. Now, Now, depending on your company and your corporate policy is what you might determine a high-risk country. Obviously, for us, it's countries where we stand a risk of either getting a malware infection or having some form of data exfiltration. So in those countries and with those users, we implement a full tunnel VPN. So basically, their device disappears off whichever network they're on. Blast chambers, spoke about this a little bit. Let's dive a little bit more detail into this. This is super useful for when you've got, let's not call it risky stuff going on, just stuff that's not fully compliant, right? Most companies are running some form of policy that says something along the lines of, you need to be running the latest version of operating systems, or at least N-1. You need to be reasonably current on patches, but there's always going to be use cases for systems that aren't, right? Finance systems are normally the biggie, right? They're massively interconnected. They've got so many moving parts, and all of those have got various levels of operating system and patch that the vendor will support. Certainly, this is my experience from being out in the field, as these are normally the ones who get a headache. So we put them in what we would call a blast chamber. We do the same with our developers. Like I said, they build and test environments, live on their own little isolated segments. It's great for if they need to work around issues, or they're trying out some new kind of like with Verni, which does network discovery, or last line. Some of the stuff they're doing might be impactful on the production network, so we've given them their own spot to do it on. But it also really makes it easy to isolate those environments and control any form of data exfiltration or malware infection if that happens. So really something to consider. Again, with everything to do with segmentation, guys, take it in small chunks. Don't try and do it all at once. And as counterintuitive as it sounds, if you're just starting a segmentation project, start with something big. Because in our case, we started with our core finance applications. And our theory there was, if we can effectively and safely segment our core finance application, there is literally no other application on our network that can claim it's impossible to be microsegmented. So that's what I say. As much as it sounds slightly counterintuitive, sometimes it's better to kind of prove that it categorically works after the usual internal testing. Obviously. Now this is key to us, and again, normally a fairly hard sell to most admins. You look at what one of the biggest, let's call it a threat vector at the moment, when a cyber attack happens. The first thing they do is they compromise. Normally, they're looking for a workstation. Sometimes they manage to get onto a server. What's the first thing they do? The first thing they do is a credential dump. Right? They're looking for what credentials exist on that device, because that allows them to move laterally in the environment. That's your classic vector to get into the east-west traffic on your network, right? For us, the easiest way to stop that kind of behavior was to make sure there's no administrator, no privileged level account information on an endpoint. So for example, on our network, we don't enroll our endpoints in Active Directory. So if someone manages to compromise my device, what do they get? Nothing. They get my local account and password. So okay, great. And we've had this over the last year. A lot of malware came out as a result of COVID. Cybercrime groups trying to capitalize on it. And I remember someone in our VMware team had their laptop hit by one of those new bits of malware. And literally, she just got asked to shut it down, put it in a box, and send it back to the SOC. And we shipped her a new device overnight, and she was back up and running the following day. No impact to the rest of the network, no impact to our other colleagues, because they couldn't do anything from her laptop. That was the key point to us. And so this is what we're doing with our administrators. We're making a fundamental change here to say, right, well, admin access is only from some form of VDI or API level activity. You cannot log on from your workstation. So you're either going via a stateless desktop environment on Horizon, or the command line interface is an SSH if it's a Linux type box, using certificate-based authentication. So there's never a local credential for someone to gain. This brings around a whole world of, right now that we're doing this, how do we get rid of passwords? How do we get secrets managed effectively so this kind of thing is really easy for our users to consume? Because like I said, a lot of administrators are really used to having their GUI, installed on their desktop, and they just load it up, type in, admin, root, whatever, the password, and they're in and managing an environment. Sometimes it's AD integrated, it's the same thing. It's now they're either putting in their privileged account information or whatever, and all of that nonsense gets cached on their machine. So it's kind of giving them just as good an experience without all that password nonsense directly onto the service they want to manage. So wrapping up, you'll notice I talk a lot about our users, our colleagues, right? It's really important to keep them front and center on all of this ZeroTrust stuff. If you make it unusable for your users or make it harder than the current, they'll find a way around. People are really inventive in finding ways around security controls. So if you're keeping your users front and center, and I'm not saying you're going to have to make some user impacting stuff, of course you will, but knowingly do it, and spend the time telling your users why it's important for them to change behavior. Keep it in manageable steps. Like I said, this is our 7-step process. Worked for us. Hopefully you've gathered something useful from it. I'll be opening up for questions in a bit. You might have more steps, you might have less steps, but make sure it's in manageable chunks. And be a good internet service provider. That's effectively what the IT function is becoming in most organizations. Treat us like an ISP, but be a good one. I'm sure we've all had experiences with bad home internet service providers. Don't be one of them. Make your users really enjoy using your services so they don't go and find another way to do it. Now, I hope you've enjoyed the chat. I just want to let you know something about our VMware on VMware program. So this is who sponsored this webinar. I work a lot with the VMware on VMware program as part of our security outreach. If you'd like to know anything about how VMware is using our products, our use cases, things we've learned, more deep dives in how we're doing things from an actual practitioner point of view, so not a sales or marketing-led conversation. This is, one professional talking to others about what we've done. These are the contact details. Drop them an email. We've got a blog site that's pretty regularly published, new things that we're doing. Got a presence on our company website there you can see as well. Got a Twitter handle. You can tweet us. That sort of thing. We love talking to customers. You can contact us via your account manager or your technical account manager if you do happen to have a TAM. They can set up a session with us. Like I said, if you take a look at the blog site, you can see the kinds of things we like to talk about. And we're always delighted to have a customer meeting and talk in more detail about some of the stuff we're doing. So please, please, please reach out to us if you want to know more.